Shoreham bridges. Now this bridge here is not from the 1980s, and that replaced a bridge from the 1920s that you may remember with the large girders, cantilever bridge. It was really quite ugly, and that replaced the suspension bridge that was built in the 1820s, known as the Norfolk suspension bridge, paid for by the Duke of Norfolk, with a lion and a unicorn at either end, the symbols of the Duke of Norfolk. So that all that survives from the earlier bridge, you can see the posts there with the lamps on top, and then the toll house to the left, although that was rebuilt in the later 19th century, but in the original style. Well, if you look, you can see the ground rising up the back there, and this was all the harbour area. Now we're going to walk out in a minute, and we're actually going to see something still watery. So the harbour was a big area. It wouldn't have been the sort of harbour that you think of today with wharfages. It was more where it was more of a natural harbour rather than man-made. But it was sufficient for the trading vessels of the Norman early medieval period to come up the river and dock here and unload them. There's a little building there, the Shoreham Club, painted blue. That was originally built as a non-conformist chapel under non-conformist denominations. Its interest lies in the fact that in the 1880s it was taken over and used by the Salvation Army. And as you may well know, in Worthing in 1884 there were extensive riots against the Salvation Army. Riots so serious that the Riot Act had to be read, and mounted Dragoon Guards had to be brought in from Preston Barracks and Brighton to restore order. And the opponents of the Salvation Army styled themselves the Skeleton Army. And without going into a whole sort of lecture about that moment in history, why the Salvation Army was so unpopular was because in various ways they represented aspects of modernity that conservative-minded, inward-looking communities found threatening. So the Salvation Army was evangelical, it was dressed in military uniforms, and we've got used to them, but when they began, that's quite threatening. People marching through your streets in military uniform. They were great supporters of temperance, and as I've indicated, temperance wasn't sort of foremost front of the mind of the inhabitants of Shoreham. But there's other things as well, like for instance the Salvation Army is arguably the first significant national organisation that gives equal status to men and women. So the leader of the Salvation Army in Worthing, the captain, was Ada Smith, a 23-year-old woman. In 1880s context, that is deeply troubling and seems a direct threat to the natural order of things. So when the Skeleton Army weren't able to carry on their activities anymore in Worthing because of the reading of the Riot Act, 1 October Sunday afternoon, about 500 of them with banners and flags marched from Worthing to Shoreham. They got to the Norfolk Bridge, not the present Norfolk Bridge that was built in the 1980s, the original Norfolk Suspension Bridge, and you had to pay a toll to cross it even as a foot passenger. They wouldn't pay the tolls. They smashed up the toll booth, they came into Shoreham, forced the pubs to open on the grounds that they were travellers, and inns were supposed to open for travellers irrespective of the time of day, got very drunk, and then came and attacked the Salvation Army here, and Captain Sarah Broadbent, again another female, comes out and remonstrates with the mob, and rocks and bricks are hurled at her, and she's severely injured, and dies some years later, not as a direct consequence, but certainly as an indirect consequence of the assault that took place. The Chief Constable of West Sussex comes over by train with police reinforcements, at which point James T, who was the general of the Skeleton Army, was seen to motion to his supporters to head back towards Worthing. So, dramatic scenes and a reminder of how turbulent and disordered these sort of towns on the south coast could be. They had their own code of conduct, in that sense they were self-regulating. But anything that was seen as against their belief system got short shrift, be it Catholics or be it Salvationists. Because the land here was owned by the Knights Hospitaller, the Order of St John, and they were a group basically of fighting monks. They're not as well known as the Knights Templar, but it was the Knights Templar were suppressed during the reign of Edward II, and their lands confiscated. And the main beneficiary of the suppression of the Knights Templar was the Knights Hospitaller, and they had religious buildings here where this street now stands. So they're quite interesting. Quite a lot of pubs, quite a lot of religious houses. Perhaps the two work side by side. If you look at the medieval street plan of Shoreham, the High Street was in the middle. So there were streets coming off the High Street like this one to the north, but they were mirrored by streets going on to the south. And they're obviously now all down to the river. But if you see cars, we're going to follow the street. And as for the streets themselves, these were all working streets. Road making, boat building, shipbuilding obviously down the London River, but they were busy people working to the sound of the work. And you get some of the little workshops still survive, you see, and others have been converted into residences. And even in my own lifetime of many of you, this area has gone up market. You know, Shoreham is definitely on the up, and I would say definitely in the 60s and 70s, living in Shoreham was considered a lower thing than living in Worthing. You know, living in Shoreham, well, it's all changed. It's all changed. It led the way. And I think probably the rope tackle, the rope tackle development started it off. There's a great movement of people from Brighton now, so it's a very, very sought after area. So although sort of physically it looks the same, you have to remember that even 100 years ago this would have been noisy with work and with smells. So at the danger of constantly repeating myself to certain people who hear me say the same things over and over again, what I said this morning is that if people from the past came into our day, the thing that they would notice was the noise and the intrusion. You know, and they'd just be thinking of constant noise everywhere. And what we would notice, we went back to the past, was the smell. The smell of effluent from various working practices, and the smell of people. Those are the two major contrasts, even with the recent past, 100, 150 years ago. Martin just made a very good point. You look at this building here, and you see the chimney, and you see the gable of the roof, and it's flat. But you look just behind and you see a mansarded or hick roof, which was the style that you get from the mid-18th century and earlier. So you can look at that and say, oh, that's a 19th century cottage, and then you look and think, no, it's not. It's much earlier. Harlequins, of course. Well, Harlequins generally reckoned to be the oldest stone-built, non-ecclesiastical building in Sussex. There are older churches, but that's not a church. That's had many uses over the years. It was one time as a customs house, and it was probably originally built as a merchant's house. That was to a building stone in the early medieval period, 12th, 13th century, was a sign of great affluence. And that reflects what I was saying at the beginning of the war. In the early medieval period, New Shoreham was a very important and prosperous port. By the late medieval period, by the 15th century, because of the silting up of the harbour, it was going into decline, and the building remained. and has been since the 1920s in the possession of the Sussex Archaeological Society. We run a small museum there that's open a couple of days. Towards the Roman period, it's believed that the River Ada and the River Arun had a common estuary, and that both rivers fed into each other and came out to the sea south of Barnsley at a place called Pend, P-E-N-D-E. The Pen Hill Road is a survival of that. Again, completely lost. There is no survival of the village of Pen because it was about a mile out to sea. But there are little remnants of that old configuration, including Widewater, about a mile over to the west. You know, there's that lagoon, and Broadwater. Although there's no water left at Broadwater, the name Broadwater is a remnant of the fact that there was a coastal inlet of water, all going back to this time when the two rivers Ada and Arun converged. So this was the home of Captain Henry Roberts, who, as Lieutenant Henry Roberts, sailed with Captain Cook. And those of you on the workshop I did yesterday, it gets very confused remembering who was on what with all these things going on. I was reading, to remember, if you were there yesterday, from the memoir of Maria Butler, and the Butlers were a seafaring family in Shoreham for generations, and their neighbour and good friend was Henry Roberts. This is perhaps the most beautiful street in the whole of Shoreham. All these buildings are old, they're at least 18th century, some are much older, they've got 18th century frontages, but behind that is Tudor or medieval work. So this is a superb street,